Welcome to this episode of Biz Talk. In this episode, we're going to be talking about setting prices. So with this, one of the things we covered in the last episode is about, looking for a product, focusing on a product, getting that to market. Customers, because the product was innovative, would find that product and buy it. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to set the price of the product, and that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. So one of the things to note in this episode, too, in the focus of this series is I've had a couple comments. I want to be very clear. This is set as sort of a business primer starter for a cottage-based or a maker-based business, or as one viewer put it, a side hustle. So the idea is to get you guys started in a business. So this is not to build a multinational conglomerate or anything like that. There's different parameters for these things, and it's not saying that once you get a side hustle going or a maker cottage business, you can't grow it, but it takes a different set, or you need to grow into those pieces. So again, the focus here is going to be cottage maker, side hustle type stuff. Get you guys started in business. All right. With that being said, I want to hit the disclaimer. Again, all this advice, just my rambling. Use it at your own risk. No guarantees expressed or implied. So with that being said, one of the first things I want to jump into, and I'm going to try to keep that is the theme of these, is just kind of hit the main point right up front. And that is set the price for the sale. Don't be emotional about the price. A lot of makers, a lot of artisans get very emotional about the price they set for their product because they feel they put their time into it, they put money into it. Forget it. It's business. You need to set the price to sell the object. Very simple. Do not become emotionally tied. Do not look at it as, I just put in so many hours. I could have worked at McDonald's and made more money. You will fail. I guarantee it. Focus on making the sale. And if you don't believe me, well, then maybe you'll believe Mr. Watson, because one of the big things that Mr. Watson of IBM fame, and probably the greatest capitalist ever, said, nothing happens until a sale is made. This is critical. Until you guys sell something, you don't have a business. Whether you sell it as a profit, you sell it as a loss, it doesn't matter. You have to be making sales. If you're not making sales, you don't have a business. Also, do not vex up front about profit. If you do, you will fail. And this is where a lot of people, when they start off, fail because it's immediately out of the door, I got to make money. I'm going to tell you guys a little secret. Very, very rarely, 1 out of a million, have I ever seen anybody start something and make money out of the gate. It simply doesn't happen. You have to pay your dues up front. You will take losses up front. You need to be prepared to take losses up front to be successful. And once you do, then you can build yourself up. Now, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as we go on in this episode, but I want to be right up front with you guys. Price it to sell. Make those sales. Start the sales happening, because once you have sales, you have feedback from customers, which is critically important, because this will help you make a better product. And second, you will have some incentive to keep this machine going. There is nothing worse than setting up your stand, putting your products out, and having nobody buy them. Get it out there at a price point. So now, one of the things I want to stress, as we've talked about, is, I focused on don't worry about the profits up front. And one of the reasons I'm saying this, and now I'm focusing on maker, again, cottage type sales. I'm not focusing on high-end artisan sales. I think they're two different things here. As in the examples that I used in the first episode about the lathe centering devices and the tool holders, those are all widgets. Those are almost commodity widgets, I'm going to call them. They're a one-to-many sale. They're not a one-to-one sale. When you sell your house, you got one house to sell, you sell it, it's done. So if you don't make good there, there's no making good on the second. That's not the case here. This is why I say don't vex about profits up front. You can always catch up later. The best thing to do is get your funnel moving first and then adjust your funnel from there, your sales funnel, that is. So again, this is again where I'm focusing. You sell your first product at a loss, and if it's a loss, you bump it up in the next product, you bump it up, and there's sort of, you'll find a pressure point. The higher you go in price, the more pressure you have on your sales. And I'm going to talk about that again a little bit further down into the episode. Now, one of the other things, I want to be very careful here. There's becoming very academic about price setting, and there's becoming very realistic about price setting. Fail on the side of being realistic about price setting. And again, as we get into this and we jump into the PROFORMA a little bit more, you'll see a little bit what I'm talking about. So, because there's a thing out there, if you Google it, Zeno's paradox, which talks about, to cross the room, you have to cross half the room, and so on and so forth. So you can never, ever cross the room. Well, there's actually now a solution for that if you look at Wolfram's Alpha for it. But my point is if you keep just kind of adding stuff on, you're going to fail. Again, we'll touch on this a little bit more, but I want to get that out there. Be very realistic about your pricing models. Do not become emotional about it. Set the price for sale. So I've given you 3 strong points right there you need to follow. And now you may say, Mr. DIY, 3dtech.com. Those are pretty simplistic, but I can tell you most people don't hear them, and they fail because they don't hear them. So with that being said, let's jump to the next part about this. So I want to take a working example. So I'm going to use a kind of an easy one. And this is going to be the example from the prior episode of the tool holder. Why do I pick this? Because I've already created one of these of my own in Fusion 360. And so I figured it's a good example. So let's do a bit of a mock-up of this and take a look at it. And so what I've done is I've gone into Cure, I've taken my version of this, loaded it onto my CR10, and seen how many I could print. Now, a couple different things to look at here. Is the cost of creating this part linear? And the answer here is yes. So what do I mean by that, linear? Well, as you add another one, the time goes up basically an equal amount for each one I add. So it's not like if I do 10 more, I save 20 minutes of time. A lot of times in CNC machining or a subtractive manufacture, you can save time in your tooling process by doing a bunch at once because it's repeating the tool and close to, in the geometry of each piece, so instead of 2 vices, you go 4 vices to 6 vices, etc. It doesn't work like this in this, so it's a very simplistic model. So know that is your part that you're going to produce be linear, non-linear in production costs. So again, here, very simple, linear. So I've gotten 60 on here. Now I could probably fiddle with it, get a few more, but again, as I've already mentioned, it's linear. I'm not going to waste the time. Cure has already told me I'm going to have about $2.40 in plastic. I looked up the power supply of the CR10, and it's a 360 watt power supply. So Curious told me it's going to take about 13 hours for this to print, and I'm just going to assume full power supply usage for that 13 hours. So 360 times 13 divided by 1,000 gives me my kilowatt hours. Now I just used the cost of about 9.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Yours might vary a bit. But it kind of gives you an idea of what the cost will be. Also, machine costs. What's it going to cost to run the machine? So I took the machine and I said it's going to run for a year. That machine, if I keep pounding at it like this, will last about a year, some 2,000 hours based upon a 40-hour work week. And so now I can know, how many hours it's going to run, 13. I can divide that by my amortized cost of the machine over a year, and I can see it costs about 54 cents. Now, you can argue this piece, but it's so small, it's not worth arguing, and you should really keep it in there because, again, if you're going to keep printing these on a regular basis, you're going to wear that machine out and you're going to have to replace it. So, figure that in there. So now I've got all the basis for my model in there. And so now I know kind of roughly what my production cost to produce on a per unit price will be. Now, this is where I'm going to pull this into a PROFORMA. What's a PROFORMA? A PROFORMA is where you create an economic simulation of some sort of opportunity. In this case, this, is selling this part. So with this PROFORMA, what we've looked at is we now have our costs coming together, so we know our per unit costs. We know that, I wasn't sure how many you get with the eBay piece. Since the quick change chuck holder that I purchased comes with 4 units, I figured it upon 4 units. Again, we can talk about varying the number in the future. So we see that, our total cost per run, in that our cost per unit group, in other words 4 units, comes out to be about 23 cents, about 6 cents a unit roughly, to produce this. However, in one of the things, I got a couple people that wrote me from the initial episode, well, you forgot about shipping, you forgot about all this, and this is where I get back to Zeno's paradox. If yes, you have to take into account, I don't want to discount that, but don't belabor the point, because as you start adding things up, you're going to collapse, you're going to implode on yourself, and it's just really silly, because you can sit there and say, because I have it on the slide, you can say, well, I've got to drive my car there. I got to take my time to go to the post office. I got to, buy wrapping. So there's a lot of components that goes into the cost of something that sort of should be considered intrinsic. And again, I'll talk about this when we get to the retained earnings point a little bit more. But just keep in mind, stay very realistic and practical about the costs that go into this. Because on a personal basis, you have to go to the post office, do something that gets stamps anyway. A lot of times they come to your door. So there's a lot of mechanics to work around what I'll call the Zeno paradox pieces of pricing. Focus on the key pricing aspects. Remember, I said you can get academic or you can be realistic. Be realistic about your prices and keep it simple and straightforward. All right. So with that being said, we also have selling fees. Now, I modeled this upon eBay selling fees, so I'm going to pay eBay. I'm going to have to pay PayPal to collect my money, and so I'm going to have to pay all those overheads and taxes. Sorry, I'm not getting into taxes yet. Strike that. But all my overhead fees for selling. So, and I look down, I'm producing these parts for roughly 24 cents, and it's costing me $2.24 to actually sell these, giving it to eBay and PayPal. This is just a reality, folks. Accept it, move on. This is part of the cost of doing business. So, but it's important to understand what the cost is of doing business too. So I don't want to discount that as we move through this. The next piece is shipping. So again, we're going to have postage. Now, I'm going to do an episode on shipping. So I've researched shipping to death. And so I already can tell you, I can ship this part to the lower 48 for easily $3.25 via the U.S. Postal Service. I sell a product very similar to this, same weight, same relative dimensions as the 4 of these. And again, I can cover, for $3.25 shipping it. Also, because I do the same thing in the box, I know the box is about a quarter. Again, I will do a section on shipping, but standardize your boxes, and you'll save yourself a lot of headache. So with that being said, I know the cost. Also, the thing is, get a Dynamo printer, a label printer. That is a must-have. I'll have a link for that down below. It's a lifesaver. Again, I'll talk more about that in the shipping episode, but I built that cost in here. So you can see what it costs. So about $3.85 to ship this product out the door is what it'll be. Sorry, the font's rather small on it, so you're going to have to forgive me on some of this. It's $3.50, not $3.25 for postage. So with that being said, I'm about $3.85 to get this out the door, to ship it to where it's going to. Now, this brings my total cost to sale, up to about $6.31. I'm selling this for $15, okay, or they're selling it for $15. So this gives me a bit of a margin to work with. So about, I'm making, if I can read this correctly, about $8.69. So roughly pretty close to 140% margin. Now, the other key is, I'm going to give you guys a big tip. Learn to work in percentages. Percentages are your friends. Notice on this, I broke down all the percentages so I know the percentages of each group, because each one of these are levers. Now, this PROFORMA is rather simplistic. This part is rather simplistic, but if you're going to be doing this in real life, you're going to want to know your percentages, because that's how you're going to manage your businesses, based upon percent. I don't care if it's a $10,000 a year business or a $1 billion a year business, you run a business on percent. So with that being said, one of the things I've also done now is created a little matrix table off to the side for the various profit margins. I think, as I mentioned in the first episode, this guy's a little bit high. Because the higher in price you get, the more pressure you get. And it is non-linear. Now, one of the things I want to talk about here is A/B testing. And actually, maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I think it's going to be on the next slide. But we're going to get into A/B testing with this. But what I'm thinking is they need to be closer to about 100% margin. And I think they would sell far more of these. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is risk. So again, I want to keep this real, but I also want to expose you to the idea of risk, because you're going to run the risk of unsold merchandise. You're going to run the risk of defective merchandise. You're going to run the risk of returned merchandise. And this is something that you should build into your economic models in the future, not now. Remember, right now, we simply want to get a product sold. So we want to keep this as basic as possible. Once you get a track record, then you can add in risk. But the one thing with risk, the risk is a double-edged sword, because if you keep building it in, usually it means you're doing something wrong. If you have unsold inventory, that means either your product isn't moving because it's not innovative enough, the price is too high, or something. In other words, it's your fault. You need to fix that. Everything with risk is your fault. If you're getting returned goods, it's your fault. There is something in there. So you want to keep risk as low as possible. Now, it's impossible to say, I'm going to have zero risk. But for right now, we're going to say we have zero risk. In the future, we'll build a little bit in as a buffer, but that's always a lever for constant improvement. Keep that in mind. All right. So I beat this up. You see what a standard PROFORMA should look like. What are the basic aspects of the cost you should take into account. So with that being said, what I did is I also created a bit of a matrix table, if you will. So how many you sold versus, a profit margin, what you could expect. Now, this has, and basically what you do is you kind of create a stair step. You notice the highlighted area. So if I lowered it to 100%, how many I'd have to sell to reach the same profit. And again, this is what we call P times Q, or, the number of pieces times the quantity to calculate. So it's linear. But again, the effects of buying pressures or pricing pressures are not typically linear. And this is where I want to talk about A/B testing. So this is going to be worth its weight in gold to you guys. So when you go to eBay, you go to Etsy, you set up your stores, set up 2. Always set up at least 2, an A and a B, okay? And in there, what you want to do is you want to have a price for one, say, maybe it's $15 for one and $12 in another store. And again, I suggest changing the colors, the things. You don't want it to say, Acme Widget A, Acme Widget B. You want to have 2 different names, whatever, so you can do A/B testing. All big companies do A/B testing. They do it in different ways. I'm giving you the simple way that I do it. I've got multiple eBay accounts, and this isn't to scam or do anything. This is for testing purposes. I will put a product out there, and I will have 2 different prices. I may have 2 different colors. I may have 2 different form factors, which I'm offering. Again, the idea is to test which one sells better. Also, don't be overly concerned about seller feedback and that kind of stuff if you have to, because again, you'll build seller feedback on both. And if anything, I found it actually creates an opportunity to create several relatively powerful stores, or storefronts or accounts, or however you want to put it. So it's definitely not a bad thing. It's worked out very well for me to help figure out the back and forth of which one sells better than the other. So one of the things that I want to hit on, though, before closing out this episode, because I know I'm getting a little bit long, is labor. I know I'm going to get a lot of questions on labor. And again, folks, I'm trying to really just kind of summarize things here in 6 to 10 minutes or so. But I want to talk a little bit about labor. So labor's free. Well, sort of. And this is where a lot of starting out businesses really fail because it's like, oh, I worked 80 hours this week and I could have worked at McDonald's. Yeah, you're right. But if you're making a commitment to start a business, guess what? You're going to pay up front. Those are the dues. Get over it. And the other piece with this is, especially your wages or the money you're going to take out of that company is going to be a little bit different. Now, if you have employees and things like that, that's a different story. And remember, as I said up front, this is more about a side hustle, starting a one-person cottage business, something like that, family business. It's not about a multi-employee business. So with that being said, you're going to take your money out as retained, from retained earnings as earned income. Now, I don't want to get into too deep of this, but I just want to put this out here because I know I'm going to get questions about labor. So basically what happens is you take in sales from a customer, you take out the cost, everything that remains is retained earnings. In other words, that creates the value of the business. You will take from that value of the business your income or your earned income from retained earnings. So whether it's $10, $100, $1,000, whatever is sort of can be taken from retained earnings that you feel appropriate, because again, retained earnings is also something you're going to use to invest in the business and keep it going. And again, I'm going to do a whole section on this. I don't want to get overly burden this, but this is where labor or your labor will be accounted for eventually in this whole cycle. So again, I know I'm going to get hit up for comments, and I just want to close that out. All right. So with that being said, again, hit me up in the comments below with your comments. It was really good. Got some really good comments off the first episode. Really, gave me some good ideas. Again, if you have specific questions, please hit me up in the comments below. A lot of what I got was, direct feedback about the content, which is good, but it's also good to have some direct questions, which I can incorporate in the future. So with that being said, bell button's over there, which means go down, hit that bell button below, comments below, swag shop in the corner, and we'll see you guys in the next Biz Talk video. And hey, have a good business.
Please click like below and subscribe to the channel.